My name's Lynn Clark. I'm honored to be here. I am the Executive Director of the Children's Coalition for Louisiana, and prior to that I was the Head of Secondary Education at the University of Louisiana at Monroe. I come out of the middle school classroom where I was a teacher for 10 years in California, so I'm honored to be part of this conversation. So I will just introduce Bill Ritz from Union Christian Academy, Ted Reeves, Union Parish School District, his new superintendent there, Heath Murray, new principal at D'Arbonne Woods Charter School, and of course Tony Kane, Downsville Community Charter. I'm going to let them introduce themselves, if that's okay, and tell a little bit about their background and how long they've been.
Bill Ritz again. I've graduated from Oral Roberts University with a master's degree in Christian School Administration. I've been involved in Christian education for 40 years. Raised in Houston, Texas, big state of Texas. So basically my background is education, and also I've spent about 50 years coaching, whether it be basketball, football, or baseball.
Ted Reeves from Union Parish. I'm in my present position as superintendent since July of this year. Very, very excited to be here and be a part of this organization. I graduated from Northwestern State University, Coach, and had a great career down there. I was fortunate enough to play baseball there and get a good education from Northwestern. And so in my school career, I've been a teacher, a coach, administrator, janitor, bus driver.
You're using all of those skills now.
That's right. Yes. And so I've had a good career, and if I had to do it again, I'd do it all over the same.
Amen. All right. My name is Heath Murray. I am the Executive Director at D'Arbonne Woods Charter School. This is my second year at D'Arbonne Woods. My previous experience has been in Morehouse Parish as a coach, a teacher, and elementary school principal. I got my undergraduate degree from Louisiana Tech University. Dr. Grafton was my advisor, and he was a big reason why I had the opportunity to go to Southern Miss and get my master's degree. And so I too would do it all over again if I had the choice.
My name is Tony Kane. I started my education career off at Neville High School in Monroe City. Taught and coached there several years, decided to go in the private sector. And once I went to the private sector, I had some people talk me into putting my name on a yard sign and running for school board. Got elected to school board when I was 24 years old and stayed there for 12 years. And got back into education once I got out of the private sector, and spent a lot of my time in alternative education working with at-risk youth until I came to Downsville. This is my 4th year at Downsville, and I'm one of those people, I guess when you look at me, I'm one of those people that likes turnaround projects, and so we pretty much turned the corner at Downsville, and we're moving forward, and we've been really excited about that.
That's great. So I know Jean has given you each a topic to speak to. If you don't mind, we'll just, who would like to go first? Heath has made eye contact, so if you could just introduce your topic and
All right. I chose the topic of the role of athletics in education. This is a topic that I was a former athlete. Like Mr. Reeves, I played baseball at Louisiana Tech. I lettered in 3 sports in high school, and I had a wonderful experience, not only in high school, but growing up in youth sports. And I feel this is a topic that is near and dear to my heart. I feel like what's happening in our society, not just in schools, but in our society with athletics, I feel like it's deteriorating. And so I've got some stats here that I want to give to everyone. And most of what I'll be talking about is going to involve varsity athletics, but it can also be relevant in youth sports as well. First of all, there are 8 million high school athletes per year in the United States. And so that's quite a number. There's a lot of participation in various sports at the high school level. approximately 6% of those will go on to compete as NCAA or collegiate athletes. And then less than 1% will have an opportunity to play professionally after that. So obviously, the reason why we play sports, the purpose of sports in our society, cannot be to grow or cultivate professional athletes. If that's the case, then we're failing 99.9% of the time. And so what I wanted to talk about was why do we play sports in school? What are the benefits? And just kind of on a personal note, whenever I watch professional athletes, and everything, it comes from the top down. Whenever I watch professional sports or sporting events, and I see a player hit a home run or score a basket or score a touchdown, and I see the amount of attention that the player wants to draw to himself or herself, it just, I cringe, because our kids, our children see this, and then, of course, it trickles down into youth sports and into high school sports. So when I ask myself, what are the benefits, what are the real benefits for playing sports, what should they be? And a lot of what you hear today, you'll probably hear a lot of progressive ideas, and I think that there's a place for that. I'm all for that. In this particular topic, though, I think you're probably going to realize that I'm quite old-fashioned with what I'm about to say. And I think as far as athletics goes in our school, I think we could stand to go back to the way it used to be. Primary benefits. I've divided the benefits for playing sports into two categories, primary and secondary. And so the primary benefits, I've identified those benefits that they should be focused on benefiting the student athlete long term. The first one is sportsmanship. And I know that this is kind of cliche. We talk about sportsmanship and teamwork, but that is a big part of learning how to play sports. And sportsmanship is basically just learning how to win and how to lose during competition. Those are two very important things that are going to carry over in these young men and young women's life, in their jobs, in their personal lives. And so sports is a very key, very valuable way of showing these young men and women how to win and how to lose, and doing it with dignity and class. Teamwork, learning how to be part of a group, learning how to strive toward a common goal. And then not only that, but putting the goal of the group or the team ahead of personal goal. And I think that's where we see a lot of things now with what I consider to have gone wrong with athletics over the years. It tends to be more about individuals and less about the team. And not only with our student athletes, but a lot of times with our parents. A lot of our parents believe that the reason why their child is playing a particular sport is so that the school can get their child a scholarship, or the school can get their child some sort of recognition. And so it's gone away from being about the team or the group as a whole and more about the individual. The third thing, the primary benefit, enhancing the educational experience. Athletics can be a very valuable tool in getting the most out of our student athletes in the classroom. There was a study from the University of Chicago that male athletes are twice as likely and female athletes are 3 times more likely to do better in school, not drop out of school, and graduate from college. So we can use our athletics to benefit our student athletes in the classroom, and that's what it should be. That's what it should be. One of the things it should be used to do. And then also student athletes who are involved, or just students in general who are involved in extracurricular activities. And that's not just athletics, but it could be cheer, it could be band. They are going to get a lot more out of their high school experience than the other students. And I try to encourage all of our students to do something after school extracurricular. Being a part of a club or a group doesn't have to be athletics. A lot of times we think of extracurricular activities as being athletics, but it can be lots of different things. But I think I try to encourage them and tell them that they will get a lot more out of their high school experience if they are a part of some type of extracurricular activity. And then as far as the secondary benefits go, and a lot of times schools will benefit, and there's nothing wrong, in my opinion, from a school benefiting from having a great athletic program, but that should not be the leading factors. That should be, a secondary benefit. But there are some benefits such as notoriety for the school. You can have an enhanced sense of school spirit whenever your athletic teams are doing well, and that's always great for a school. And then also things like improved attendance. You can use athletics to make sure that these kids are coming to school, and also discipline. Studies show that students who participate in extracurricular activities such as athletics, they do have a better attendance rate, and they do have a better discipline history than those who do not. And so that is, in a nutshell, that's my take on the role of athletics in education. I have been involved in sports my whole life. I had a grandfather who played professional sports, and I think that as long as I am at Doggone Woods, then I will be looking for men and women to be a part of our athletic program who have the same values as I do on this topic. And it's not easy. Sometimes in certain sports, when I interview potential coaches, I try to make it clear that they are teachers first and coaches second. And sometimes it's difficult to find to fill positions with coaches who really believe that. And so there are a lot of challenges. And my take on the matter is that I may not be able to change the world, but I can do everything in my power to change what goes on at Doggone Woods Charter School. So,
Thank you.
thank you.
So we have just a few moments until
Yeah.
our next segment, so if it's all right, I'll ask a question, but I also will open it up to the room on this topic, and we'll do that after every topic if we don't go long.
Okay.
So you said something about you want to go back to the way things used to be, and you talked a little bit about that individual versus team. What are some other ways that you see kind of that looking back being beneficial to your students?
Well, I think that we used to emphasize sportsmanship more than we do now. Now I believe we've kind of gotten to more of a winning at all costs mentality, to where we used to say it's not whether you win or lose, it's how you play the game. But I think that's kind of been lost over the last few years. And so I think that's probably one of the main ways, in addition to the individualism.
I did have one more question. How early do you start your athletic program?
Well, that's a whole other issue. At our school, we start in 6th grade.
You do.
That's our junior high program. But I do know that we have students very early on in kindergarten, 1st, 2nd grade, who not only start participating in sports, but participating to the point to where they're traveling and playing on the weekends. And you see a lot of burnout in kids these days. By the time they get to be junior high age even, they really have lost the love of playing sports before they could really even know how to play.
It's not lost on me that we have 4 coaches up here. So clearly, as far as leadership training works, does anybody have a question, clarifying question they'd like to ask you? Do any of y'all like to add anything to the topic?
I think what he meant, going back to the old days, is nowadays everybody gets a trophy for participating. Okay? Used to, you had winners and losers. And if you lost, and you figured out how to become a winner. And so you work harder to get to that point. Not to the fact that I know the smiles of giving a child a trophy, that's priceless. I understand that. But then, you know, like he said, you got to work hard to make things happen for yourself. Kind of, what are you going to do for me attitude now.
I love the learning how to lose. You forget how important that is.
That's right.
Would anybody else like to ask a question or add a comment?
I think one of the comments that you made, Heath, that's very true. You talk about them getting them in early to do the travel ball and all that kind of stuff. And people see athletics as a way to pay their kids college. And for many people, they don't realize what a delusional dream that is when you get that 6% number. And even if your kid isn't at 6%, when they get there, it's a totally different experience. I can't speak for Mr. Fritz, but I know 3 of us at this table have, and mine was not nearly as successful as Mr. Murray and Mr. Reeves, but we've all had some experience playing college athletics. And it's a job, and it's a very underappreciated job when you look at the people that you're trying to please. And that doesn't resonate well with a lot of those kids once they get there, because they've grown up in nurturing and sports environments where they were the center of attention, and now you're in an environment where you're not the center of attention, and if you don't want to perform, we got 10 people behind you ready to kick you out the door. And a lot of people also don't realize you may get your kid that scholarship, but when we came up, if you had an athletic scholarship, it was guaranteed for 4 years. Now, they just bring their kid in and say, you don't fit into our program, we're taking your scholarship. And it disproportionately affects kids of color, because a lot of those kids didn't have the means to get to college any other way, and now they're left without a way to pay for college, and a lot of them have a high dropout, very high dropout rate.
That's true. Injury. Mr. Ritz, I'm looking at the topics now, and I noticed that you are elementary and secondary school curriculum of the future, and I think that's a good segue. Do you mind speaking next? That is your topic, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am. I was thinking sports.
I know, sorry. Feel free to weave that
I didn't have, feel free to weave sports into the academics. The future of education has gone strictly digital. It is there right now. Today, students today, whether it be high school or college, can get a college diploma or a high school diploma online. They don't have to go to class. They don't have to do anything. I just got through talking to one of my former students that's in med school over at LSU Shreveport. She was missing class, and she was coming over to our school to participate in what we were doing for that day, and I was asking her, how you do this? You're in med school. She said, no problem. I'll just go home tonight and watch it on my podcast. So many of their students don't even have to go to class anymore. You can watch it on podcast. This is totally a different change from the textbook classroom. And that's what we'll be looking for in the future. Classroom in the future will be textbook free. It will be all digital. The questions being asked by many is why memorize history facts when you can go look it up on Google or Wikipedia and find the information you want. Why memorize? I was talking with someone this morning about why would anybody want to memorize that Christopher Columbus discovered America in 1492 when you just Google it and find it real easy. Don't have to worry about memorizing dates anymore. It's there, all for you. Teachers will be less of a disseminator of knowledge, and they'll be more of a facilitator of knowledge, because what they're going to be doing is using videos, YouTube, to teach and to expound upon the area that they want to teach. So there's a growing proliferation of open source sites aimed at education. Sites like MIT Open Sourceware, they are producing the entire curriculum for MIT. They produce it, video, software. Other sites are Open Educational Resources, Murloc, Hippocampus, offer their own expert written content for education. The second area is interest driven, which is really fascinating to me, that schools now have to be more concerned about the interest of the students instead of just having one size fits all. Those students typically have to wait until their third year of college to choose what they want to learn. The idea of a K through 12 education being tailored to students' own interests is becoming more commonplace all across America. Research has shown that students' interest is directly correlated to their achievement. The better way is to motivate each student to learn through his or her passions. Passion drives people to learn and perform far beyond what they think they can achieve. It's amazing to me, I mean, because you're going to have to rethink the entire educational program if you're going to do it toward the interest of a student. You've got 30 students. Teachers today have 30, 35 students in a classroom. You've got 35 different individuals, 35 different individual thought patterns, 35 different ways of learning. And you're going to have to sit there and focus on the interests of each one of those students, and you have to design curriculum for all of that. It's going to be very difficult. It's going to be very time consuming. The third area is skills. Talking more and more about the buzzword is 21st century skills today are being thrown around and describing what needs to be taught in schools. Real world readiness. Things like collaboration, innovation, critical thinking, communication are thought to be just as important as U.S. history and calculus because they are practical skills that can be used in the world outside of the classroom. So the world that we know as educators is going to be a lot different in the future. In fact, it's already here, getting to our classrooms quicker than we really are prepared for it.
See, you made the tie into athletics, collaboration. That's perfect. So we have some time for some questions. It's wonderful to hear you say that, and I think it's the ideal case of a classroom, that we have differentiated instruction for every child in that class, and that we're able to do interest. And I'm going to ask Dr. Kane to speak next because technology is the only thing that's allowing us to even think about that. Your technology, right?
Correct.
Good. So what are some of the questions you have about this model or comments?
How do you get prepared for that? I'm sure you've already started at UCA. My wife is a high school English teacher, so I hear her come in all the time, and I take and have her grade paper some, and she'll say, I'm having trouble reaching this child. And she even asks my advice sometimes, and I'm like, well, I can't help you there. I don't know, so I'm just curious to know, how do you? Is it possible to ever reach every child with one person in the class?
No, I don't see how that's possible. We're having to separate the levels of learning already in the high school level. I mean, right now we have a higher level of math. We do dual credit with Louisiana Tech with college algebra and trigonometry. And yet there's some of our students that can't do that, so we have to have another teacher be able to teach that level of mathematics. We want to try to get them at least algebra 2. So it's going to be very difficult. And then throw in the fact is that you're going to have a lot of students that are special education. That is to me is the drawback to my school, is that we have a lot of students that have special needs. And praise God, I have at least a special ed teacher on my staff, but I mean still, she can't handle all the school from K-5 all the way through 12th grade. So we're overburdened. And then the other thing that's hindering me more than anything is the finances.
Yeah.
You don't have the money. There's a new technology, and probably most of the school, Mr. Reeves and all the rest of them probably have it in there, is that whiteboard, electronic whiteboard, that I discovered, I think about 9 years ago, that I had a man representative come in, that the kids can take this little tablet in front of them, take a test on the whiteboard right there, put the answers in, it calculates and does everything for you. You don't need grade books anymore. So there's just lots of avenues that you can use. How do you get to those individuals that need your help? It's one-on-one.
One child at a time.
One child at a time, and that's what creates a bigger, compared to these other schools, they have a bigger problem than I do. But still, we have to take those students one at a time.
One of the things, one of the questions, I guess it's a question and a comment as well, but one of the things that I hear a lot when people are speaking about education is it's almost like they're trying to fit the new model into an old mindset. It's like putting new wine into, old wineskins, right? It just doesn't work. So, we like to think about how we did it before, because I remember as growing up, we were always in classes in the early years, in multiple levels, and one child taught the other child. And I remember seeing recently a model where a lot of that, and there was high success. As a matter of fact, every student within that school went to college.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't because a teacher stood in front and stand and delivered information. The students were adept enough to learn the content and to help their fellow student. So I don't know for sure if we were looking at a model now where the teacher is responsible for teaching or giving all of the information. Teaching a student how to learn is certainly, I think, one of the most primary things for teachers, right? So how do we go about addressing the model of how teachers are being prepared to teach in today's society, in today's era of digital technology? Because students know, you're right, they get all of the information they need online, probably more than they know how to assimilate in their brains, right? But we do know that all information isn't good information.
True.
So how do we teach them to seek out? Because Wikipedia, I could go and post right now in Wikipedia, based on what I think, right?
Right.
So how do we teach them
One of the
prepared?
things that I was reading about is that what I feel needs to happen, and it probably has already taken place. I haven't seen it, but I mean, usually what worked before is you had an intern. If you had a trade that you had right there, you had somebody that came in as an apprentice. Think what they need to do right now. Not all the time, and some colleges make it different, but what they do is they have a 6-week period of student teaching. What they need to do, what I feel they need to do in the colleges in preparing educators today, one, is the technology skills for one, because you have teachers today that have paid the price for 30 years, and you bring the new technology to them, what are they going to do with it? I mean, I'm not being ugly, but I'm saying, what are they going to do with it? Because that's not their forte. Technology is not what they want. I've been teaching for 30 years. I know how to teach. Now I've got to use this technology. No. But I think what colleges need to do is have a year where they send a student to one of the high schools, somewhere around right there, and let them be mentored by a teacher that's been there and utilize the technology that they've learned in college and apply it to the classroom for a whole year. Not just 6-week period or whatever short period of time that they have for student teaching. I think they need to be there for the whole year to learn the trade from a mentor teacher. When I was in Texas, that's what we went to. I went to a mentor training session there in Texas that I could go back and mentor teachers and to become better educators. And so I think that's just my opinion. And I've read about where they're starting to do that in some colleges across America, where they're just putting them in there for a year.
So I'd like to speak to that. So I know Tech was an early adopter in that and doing a year-long field-based teacher preparation program, and I think ULM has just gotten that. So they are moving to that model. We're going to have to move on to the next. Dr. King?
Well, mine's technology, and it kind of segues into what he was talking about. He was talking about a lot of different digital curriculums and digital textbooks and things like that. And my first experience with technology in education when I was a kid was the mimeograph machine. I mean, think about that, the mimeograph machine, or that little thing, device over on the chalkboard at the bottom on the chalk rail with the 3 pieces of chalk in it. That was technology in the classroom when we came through. And now you look at, number one, you don't find chalk in the classroom anymore, or erasers or anything like that, and you're looking at smart boards where in teaching math, if you were in Algebra 1 or Algebra 2 and your teacher was teaching graphing equations regardless of what kind of curve it was, and they look at that and say, now this coefficient right here is very important because if this coefficient has this particular property, it may move the particular curve to this quadrant on the board, or it may change the shape of the curve or whatever, and you just had to be able to know that that was the case. Nowadays, they can actually put that formula on the board, it will draw the curve for them, and then the teacher can take their fingers and change the curve, and the kids can watch how that particular coefficient changes, so they can particularly visualize exactly how it impacts the mathematical calculation. So I think that's one of the benefits that you see in math instruction. My biology teacher has a program on his smart board where if he wants to carve up a heart and break it open and do And they can see the, as opposed to just pulling the heart out of the frog and doing it, and all the kids are sitting there like this, they can actually do it up on the board and they can see it. And so that's been a lot of change in a very short period of time. But what we got coming down the road is unbelievable. And what it's going to be is artificial intelligence. Mr. Fritz was talking earlier about how to differentiate that instruction for every kid in the room. Well, with artificial intelligence, once they get broadband to the point that it can support artificial intelligence, and once they get computing power and software generation to that point, you're going to actually have that differentiation. You're going to see a radical shift in what goes on either at a brick and mortar school or what is a shift away from a brick and mortar school. Because right now, electronic instruction is pretty much a two-dimensional process. Something goes on the computer screen, kid sees it, takes notes, answers question's wrong or it's right. What you've got coming down the road is a visual instructor pops up and they are instructing, the child is responding as if they were a teacher in the classroom. The algorithm is processing that response and giving an immediate stimulation back to the student of, well, here's where you're missing this. Right now, kid misses it, they don't understand, they got to go get mom, a teacher, a facilitator, call auntie who teaches math at the next school down the road, whatever. But now that software is going to be able to say, here's where you're making your mistake, here's what your problems are. Let's go back and rework this. And it's going to be a two-way level of communication instead of a one-way level of communication. And we're not far down the road from this. There's actually a program in the Air Force where they're doing this for IT training in the Air Force for their personnel. And what they've been doing a study on it, and that study has demonstrated that those participants in that artificial intelligence instruction actually are more successful in mastering and retaining the material than those students who are in a traditional classroom or doing self-instructed study. So that's coming down the road. And as usual, the military is going to finance the bulk part of it on the R&D end, and then they're going to figure out how they can, these companies that are doing it with the military, once they get the R&D costs out of the way, they're going to find that optimum point where we as schools and school districts are willing to invest in it, and they're going to find a way to, again, get into our instructional dollar. But right now, the biggest problem we have, and the problem's almost disappeared, you got to have huge broadband to support that level of information going across the internet. And you've got to have hardware that can process it. So, because you're also talking about the next step down the road, rather than it being a two-dimensional instructor on the computer screen, you're talking about lessons and things like that. So it's going to be unbelievable. We have a hard time understanding it. Our kids are watching it on TV every day. And if you look at it, I'm a Star Trek and Star Wars nerd. How many things off Star Trek and Star Wars are now in reality? You used to look on there and they walked around with this little handheld computer with some little blinking lights and stuff, and we've got that now. I mean, the iPad that you carry every day is 30 times or more powerful than the computer they use to send people to the moon. And so it's pretty unbelievable, and it's going to radically shift how we manage education, because you're talking about, once it's put into application, you're talking about a kid that never has to leave home. Whereas right now, if a kid stays home for homeschooling, we're not quite sure what's going on there. And oftentimes, if they're doing an online school, it's still kids watching this, they've been given an assignment by a real teacher, and that real teacher may be grading some of it, but they're not getting that real-time, one-on-one interaction as they're going to get with artificial intelligence. So that child who's in medical school that's coming to help out at your school, they're going to be enrolled in a class, but they're going to be enrolled in that class just as a matter of point, and they're just going to do it. And they're going to do it to their own pace. They may graduate medical school in 2 years as opposed to 3, and then go straight to their residency. And you're talking about the MIT program with the MOOCs. Right now, again, that's a two-dimensional experience, but somebody like you or me, we can go to the MIT program, and I think there's also one for Harvard, where you can go do that, and you can get the equivalent of a degree just by going through and doing all that study. Now, you got to have a lot of self-motivation. Well, that's where AI is going to come in and give that child the motivation, because they're getting real-time experience. And So I'm looking forward to it. Thank God I'm gonna be on the end of retirement because they're gonna probably not need principals and superintendents and stuff like that anymore. But that's where we're going.
Interesting.
That's right. You said Star Wars, I was thinking James Bond movies.
Those are good too.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, let's get. I have lots of questions, but I'll let you all comment first. Wow. What's the timeline?
I think you're very close. You've got some of you may have heard it, Moore's Law came up back in the early 1960s. Basically said computing power doubles every 18 months, and they keep waiting for Moore's Law to play out, but it doesn't. And then since then, Moore's Law has been extrapolated not only to computing power, but technology. I mean, if you think about all this, I mean, it just blows my mind when I think about how I live life and the things I had exposure to when I was a kid, and the things that kids are exposed to now, and the opportunities they have. I mean, it's just unbelievable type stuff. I would say sometime in the next 10 to 12 years, you're going to see artificial intelligence learning come online. Because, I mean, you already have it in the military. It's just when can they get it cost effective for public education?
It's a scary thought for me because I think about our students now, my children, their communication skills and how deficient they are at the moment with the technology that we have. But when you start talking about students learning from home, which means they won't be interacting with other students, it's kind of alarming to me to think about, you know, what that's going to do to their social skills.
So I want to piggyback on that. So world of work, you know, so much of what we do is preparing them for the career. Are we seeing the same sort of revolution happening in our world of work as far as technology and those virtual communications?
I think so.
One of the technologies I read about that really, it more disturbed me than it excited me, is the use of biometrics in education, where there are sensors, whether the kid's alone or in a classroom, there are sensors monitoring their blood pressure and temperature and all their reactions, so they can give immediate feedback to the teacher as to the anxiety level of that student and where they are so that teacher can intervene. And I'm sitting there going, okay, that's all fine and good in the classroom, but where does that data stop? I mean, where you're sitting in a room. One of the coolest things I read about this weekend had absolutely nothing to do with preparing for this discussion is they've now got a new lie detector test. I don't know if anybody saw it on the news this week, but the temperature of your nose actually shrinks when you lie because the temperature goes down, and then the temperature of your forehead goes
so that
up.
Pinocchio thing was
Yeah, no, it's in
absolutely
reverse.
right.
Your nose can tell on you, but the discrepancy between the temperature in your nose and the temperature of your forehead, the larger that discrepancy is, the higher probability that you're lying. And it's 80% more reliable than a polygraph test. And so, I mean, but where does that information stop as they're collecting it in a database and when they use it against other people and against you and against populations? And I think that's one of the big concerns too, as technology becomes more prevalent. How is it going to interfere with our civil rights and our rights to privacy?
Absolutely. So, Mr. Reeves, we have you as the last person, and you'll be speaking about campus security. Oh, and that's a beautiful segue, security.
That's right. Thank you. Before I get started, I'd like to, number one, thank my supervisors coming today. It's very appreciated. Mr. Tommy Bennett, one of the school board members, thank y'all for coming. And also, if you look on the program, we're remembering Mr. John Ellis, and that's pretty special because you see his, he's Mr. Linville over there. And I know it's not a part of my what I'm supposed to talk about today, but I thought that was pretty neat, and thank you so much for that. School safety, or campus safety. Our jobs, you talked about up here, is to educate our kids. But one of the biggest priorities is safety of our kids. Because that mother and daddy or grandmother or auntie or whoever that morning sends their kid to school. It's a great responsibility now for the school to take care of that kid for 8 hours and then send them back home. That's a great responsibility. And that has changed over the years because society, and we'll get into some of the reasons why that happened. Just And I used all the skills they talked about. I went on the computer and got all, I can give you stats or anything you want. But I'm just going to kind of tell you kind of my life and how it kind of evolves with school safety here. Some things I found out. Every 64 days from a period of like 2004 to 2011, every 64 days there was a school shooting. Okay? And then it changed to where the statistics show that every 200 days there was a mass shooting, not necessarily a school shooting. And so that was, society has changed. Now why? We can debate that a little bit later. But basically, you know, educating the kids is our number one goal. But safety, what does safety mean? In other words, on our campus, we got to be aware. We got to have a plan for active shooter. We got to have a plan for bomb threats. We got to have a plan for power failures, gas leaks. Okay, fights, normal things that happen sometime. Weather-related problems. In other words, tornado. We're very, very fortunate to have a safe room at our elementary school, one of the few in the state that can withstand a tornado. We can put all our kids in that one area and be safe. Fire drills, fire, suicide, family problems, and child abuse. That would be some of the areas that we're going to talk about when we start talking about the active shooters. My focus on safety is the one that bothers me the most is the active shooter. That's the one that, and when it's all said and done, my fear is if one gets on a bus, what happens there? So you got a fishbowl, you got them right there. What do you do? And so that's my greatest fear. But let's talk a little bit about, you know, where did it come from? I mean, what kind of shooter would do this? What kind of person would do this? And I went back and looked at, you can look up all kinds of stuff here. But the one I really looked at was a Columbine. That's the first one that really kind of got the attention of what was going on and found the weaknesses in our school safety programs. And a lot of it goes back to communication skills and all these things that Coach talked about here, what we all talked about, is that where was the communication of that child? Where did he get lost? Was he a mental student? Did he couldn't take failure very good, which athletic teaches you, because in the big scheme of things, in the playoffs, there's only one winner. That's the state champion. The rest of you is a trail of tears. But how do you handle that? Some people can't handle these things, and it turns into these active shooters. Bullying, we talked about that earlier. Back in our day, it was picking on somebody. All right? And we knew how to take care of it. Now, these days, bullying is it's up to the next level. And then we have to go to counseling on how to do these things. Where do we get to that point? So these are some of the things that we're going to look at. As far as our schools, we're very fortunate to have new buildings. And so the new things is have you one entrance. You got to have a pass key to get into one entrance. Okay? We also have the opportunity to 3 different places. Let's say an active shooter comes on the high school campus and he has the office under control. We have 2 other places where the intercom system is, and somebody can get to that intercom and announce whatever the code word or whatever the deal is, got an active shooter on campus. So that's pretty neat too. I asked them, I said, what happens if electricity goes off? Well, that's not a good deal. We won't go there, but basically it's a lockdown situation. The hospital the other day had a mock trial of an active shooter on that. So the hospital is real close to our school, so we went into lockdown too. And so Eric Carter, our principal, called and said, all right, we're fixing to go into lockdown. Just to let you know, it's a drill. Okay? Within 1 minute, all our kids were in the right spots and what happened. So we were very pleased with that. 7 warning signs of an active shooter. Okay? Basically, I'm on ease to these pretty quick. A lot of times they've been bullied. Somewhere in their lifetime they've been bullied, they've been persecuted, they've been injured. They have suicidal ideas. We had a child the other day that whether they really mean that or not, if they say it in today's society, you got to deal with it. They may be kidding, but we don't know that. So they have problems with communication. That goes back to what we talked about up here. If you're in front of that computer and you're learning, you can knock the top out of that ACT. But where are you going to score in good old communications and society skills? What are you going to do there? Perception of a traumatic loss, of a failure. Somebody who is an active shooter has a stockpile of guns. A lot of people didn't know. That was kind of shocking. So how do you know they have a stockpile of guns? Well, especially in the Union Parish, where any of the parishes I've ever been in, you go deer hunting. Back when our day, a lot of kids go deer hunting before school, and they'd pull in school and have these guns in there, go in class, and it was no big deal. The society has changed. And there's usually an active shooter is going to tell somebody. Somebody knows this is going to go down. And then prior to a violent outburst, they will cry for help. Somehow, they will cry for some type of help. And so these are some of the things we've got to look at. The Secret Service, who deal with the safe school investigations, they did a study, and I'll go through these real quick. There is no accurate or useful profile on it. I mean, you can't just look at a kid and say, oh, you're going to be a shooter. That does not show up. It does not show up. Incidents are planned. They very seldom does a school shooter just say, okay, today I'm going to shoot up school. They plan it out. And if you go back and look at their history, you can see that. Prior to the incidents, other students knew about the attack. Most of the attackers engage in some type of behavior before the incident. Something will trigger that they're going off. Okay? And they're reaching out for help. And that's where us as mandatory reporters and so forth, that's our job to identify these kids. Most attackers do not directly threaten the ones they shoot. They may not have a beef with them. Okay, they just be the first one they see. That's what they do. Most attackers are bullied. Most attackers experience some type of loss, a failure, which goes back to athletics, dealing with failure, how you deal with that. Most attackers have access into use of weapons. They have access to them. Other students were in some part involved in this attack. A lot of times they do it, they plan these things out in 2 or 3. And most attackers, when the attack is taking place, are stopped by somebody else besides law enforcement. That goes back to your principals and teachers. You know, I was thinking about the other day, who's the first responder going to be? Because we're fortunate to have 2 SROs on our campus. They're going to be the first ones that are out there. They're going to take that first bullet if you think about it. Okay? Or could be who's going to stop that child or that person? All right, how are we going to help change this culture? How are we going to try to help where these shootings will go away? Well, we got to get respect, cultural respect. Now, we can go back to respect of who? Respect of elders, respect of the school. If you go back and look, was that child involved in school? Okay? Was he an athlete? Was he in the band? Let's go back and look at the history. Communications between students and adults. That means volumes to me. Communication between school personnel who are teachers and principals and their students. The best teachers are the best communicators. Okay? They're the ones that can reach. You say one of the hardest things to do is you got little Johnny who's down here. You got Jane that's up here. Now how you teach in between? Because you got students in that class. Well, you got to communicate. You got to know these kids. You got to know their families. You got to know what's going on. And the best teachers are the ones that know this. You got to break the code of silence. If we, as administrators, teachers, parents, whoever, if you see something that's not right, you got to say something about it. I'm not going to get involved. I don't want to say anything. No, we got to say something. And so, also, we talked a little bit about we've got to do a better job in preventing bullying. Now, we kind of made light of it a while ago, but that is a big issue, especially to a child who's being bullied. Okay? That's a big issue to them. And a lot of times, it'll be okay, you're fine, and then it never gets fine. So we got to do a better job with that. We need to have plans, make sure our schools always have a plan. I know these guys here have got a plan for, things that go on in their school. And you got to practice those plans too. You just can't put them on the shelf and let them sit up there. You got to make sure that it happens, because once somebody comes upon your campus, you cannot panic. That's the worst thing you can do. You've got to react. Okay? You've got to react. Cameras, things like this on your campus, or technology, as we talked about, has helped to secure our campuses. But we need more cameras. We have the ability to hit one button and everybody's cell phone will go off. Just like the other day, I guess a couple of weeks ago, the president or somebody's up in his office hit a button and everybody's cell phone went off at one time. Technology like that. Let people know that there is a problem.
Thank you. Late. We have just a few minutes to wrap up, but I'd like to stay on the security issue in case anybody has any questions before we move, and just let everybody say something to close. Does anybody have any questions about security?
I'd like to
Yes, Mr.
ask Superintendent Reeves, or make a comment about, well, all of you men have presented things that we need to know as the public today. But the governor's staff funded a program several years ago here in North Louisiana, and we went all the way across from Bossier, all the way across North Louisiana, trying to find out what is the #1 problem in our classrooms. And we used classroom teachers. We did not use the principals, but classroom teachers. And they came out with something that you just touched on. You used the word respect. The lack of respect for authority. The classroom teachers. The lack of respect for peers, and the lack of respect for self-respect. So it boiled down to 3 things there, all dealing with respect. With what you have told us today, with technology taking over a great deal of our classrooms, how do we address this lack of respect and he mentioned lack of communication, and that was brought home through 2 incidents at Louisiana Tech when we did leadership training for the football team, and the football players didn't know each other's name because they never met with anyone except their representative coach. They didn't do anything together, and that's foreign. And then the students, I asked the students in a classroom of 35 to name 5 people in the class. And they all looked at me like, you're crazy. I said 4, 3, 2, 1. Girl raised her hand and she said, he's in one of my classes. No name. And I said, how many of you live in dormitories where you have suite mates? Somebody name your suite mates. None of them could. None of them. I said, you mean to tell me you use the same commode and you don't even know their names? They didn't. How do we address this lack of respect and this getting to know our classmates in their schools?
So I'd like to just add to that question to let everybody respond to it. So I felt this tension between individualization or differentiation and, of course, with technology creating that isolation. And then you've got a school which could be a very dangerous place for a child, but could also provide that emotional stability to create a very supportive place. And of course, you hit it on early, that tension between the individual win and the team win. So as we close today, just thinking about this idea of respect as a possible signpost and where we are going, can each each of you speak to the themes that we talked about today and sort of the best case scenario, but also possibly the worst case scenario. Would you like to start?
I'm going to follow up on your comments. I think that's always been a problem, an underlying problem, and we can always talk about the good old days and all that kind of stuff, but one of the things when I used to teach history, one of the things I put on the board, and it had do not erase by it, and it stayed there all year long, is that people are no different today, or kids are no different today than they were 50 years ago, 100 years ago, or 250 years ago. And the two things that I use to illustrate that point, one of them, as we all know, art reflects society. There was a movie that came out in 1953 or 1954 called Blackboard Jungle. The person that was the star was Sidney Poitier. And it was a movie about struggling with respect in the classroom, working with at-risk students, and how he won those over. And we've seen a whole bunch of movies like that since then, regardless of who. But the respect issue has always been a problem within, I would say, the Western culture. But the thing I think that makes it worse today, these kids have something that they never had before, and that's anonymity. They truly believe when they're interacting on their electronic devices through social media that even though their name is on it, they're anonymous. And the kids aren't, I mean, the kids are bad about it, and it's because the adults are bad about it. It wasn't but just a few years ago, it was like 7 or 8 years ago, an entire senator on D.C., in Washington, D.C., he fired his entire staff because they were on social media making fun of him and talking about how they were getting drunk in the office in the middle of the work day, in the middle of the work week, and thought that they were just being anonymous. And somebody calls him and says, guess what's going on Facebook? They shot him a copy of it, and he walks in and says, everybody give me all your keys, you're fired. There's just there's this fallacy of anonymity when they act this way. And like he said, worrying about the isolationism, it just makes it worse when they do get in group formats because they really don't know how to interact. And it's very difficult. And we deal with that. I dealt with a situation like that this morning right before I came over here. I mean, we deal with it literally every day where kids are interacting with each other in social media in inappropriate ways because they think they're anonymous.
Mr. Murray?
I would also like to talk on the respect issue that Dr. Grafton brought up. I think that kids are, in a lot of ways, they are the same as Tony said, than they've always been, but I do also believe that they respond to different methods. And I remember when I was a student, whenever teachers or administrators would deal with behavior issues, they would use fear as a motivator. And that was effective. And if you'll think back to those of you who are over the age of 30, if you'll think back to the methods that were used whenever you were in school, a lot of it was fear-based. But that doesn't work today on these students. There's nothing that we can do that are going to scare these students. But what does appeal to them is treating them with respect. There's a saying that I love that goes, that students, they don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And I think that we've got to change the ways in which we try to address behavior. I'm not saying that students should get away with breaking the rules, but those administrators and those teachers in those classrooms, they need to, I think we have to do a better job of showing these students that we want what's in their best interest. And sometimes it may be tough love, but nonetheless, I don't think that we're going to be able to continue to try to use fear, whether it be the threat of corporal punishment or suspension or detention, those type things. I don't think that we're going to be successful trying to use those as our primary method for dealing with behavior. I think that probably being proactive is the key, and creating those relationships in those classrooms to where students want to please the teacher because they know that teacher would do anything for them.
Yes. Superintendent Reeves?
The one thing I'd like to focus on is it goes back to communication. My minor was speech, and so went back to a homecoming at school I taught at for a while, and some of the kids came back up, and we talked about things that we did in that speech class. And he said, "Coach, you're making us get up and before a group, worst thing ever happened to me, but just think of how much you open your mouth every day and talk." Okay? And there's a 50-50 chance you're going to say something wrong. Right? And so how you deal with communicating with people has a whole lot to do with your relationship whenever you become married or you get a job and people that you work with and so forth. So I think we're missing the boat there. And then I learned the other day, Coach, that one of the new, like you're not supposed to put your elbows on the table. When you eat, phone's not supposed to go up there. That's a new deal. Phone's not supposed to be on the table.
Mine's the timer.
But I can remember the days of in Union Parish going up to my papa's house, sitting on the porch and talk and talk. So when my grandkids come, what do I do here? And I'm guilty as what game you got on there now? How about see what you got? And so we sit there and play games instead of talking. And so those are things that I think as educators we can get tight. Technology is a great deal, but there's nothing better than just plain old what ticker right there and talking about it. Thank y'all for letting us come today.
Mr. Reeves, would you like to just add a final word?
I want to talk about the respect and how to deal with this. In the Christian education world, to deal with this, we teach it more than anything else. We teach what respect is. But I've said this for many years to parents who don't like what I have to say. I say, what I see in your child's been taught at home. What I see in your child is what you teach your child at home. It's either going to be good or bad. You either teach them respect or you don't. It's as simple as that. So the lack of right there is a failure of the family. Failure of the family unit. A lot of people don't want me to say that, don't want to hear that, but it's the bottom line. You teach respect at home first. I mean, I was taught when I was younger, if I didn't say yes ma'am or no sir, I could pick myself up from the other side of the room. That was mandatory in my house. I respected my elders, I respected my grandparents, because I loved them. And we're not being taught that right now. Today's world is not being taught that way. So,
Thank you so much. So it's 1 o'clock, it's a little past 1 o'clock, but if you've got an individual question, I bet you could pin one of these guys down. I just want to say it's been a real honor to be able to be part of this conversation. I've learned so much. Thank you.
Thank you.